Kane's matter-of-fact tone, his unfurbished narration, gave no hint of the full meaning of that tale, of what lay behind those calm and measured words, the sea-fights and the land-fights, the years of privation and heart-breaking toil, the ceaseless danger, the everlasting wandering through hostile and unknown lands, the tedious and deadening labor of ferreting out the information he wished from ignorant, sullen, and unfriendly savages, black and white. "I came here," said Kane simply. But what a world of courage and effort was symbolized by that phrase! A long red trail, black shadows and crimson shadows weaving a devil's dance, marked by flashing swords and the smoke of battle, by faltering words falling like drops of blood from the lips of dying men. Not a consciously dramatic man, certainly, was Solomon Kane. He told his tale in the same manner in which he had overcome terrific obstacles, coldly, briefly, and without heroics. "You see, Marilyn," he concluded gently, "I have not come this far and done this much, to now meet with defeat. Take heart, child. We will find a way out of this fearful place." "Sir John took me on his saddle-bow," the girl said dazedly, and speaking slowly, as if her native language came strangely to her from years of unuse, as she framed in halting words an English evening of long ago. "He carried me to the seashore where a galley's boat waited, filled with fierce men, dark and mustached, and having scimitars and great rings to the fingers. The captain, a Moslem with a face like a hawk, took me, weeping with fear, and bore me to his galley. Yet he was kind to me in his way, I being little more than a baby, and at last sold me to a Turkish merchant, as he told you. This merchant he met off the southern coast of France, after many days of sea travel. This man did not use me badly, yet I feared him, for he was a man of cruel countenance, and made me understand that I was to be sold to a black sultan of the Moors. However, in the gates of Hercules his ship was set upon by a Cadiz slaver, and things came about as you have said. The captain of the slaver believed me to be the child of some wealthy English family, and intended holding me for ransom. But in a grim, darksome bay on the African coast, he perished with all his men except the Greek you have mentioned, and I was taken captive by a black chieftain. I was terribly afraid, and thought he would slay me, but he did me no harm, and sent me up country with an escort, who also bore much loot taken from the ship. This loot, together with myself, was, as you know, intended for a powerful king of the river peoples. But it never reached him, for a roving band of Negari fell upon the beach warriors and slew them all. Then I was taken to this city, and have since remained slave to Queen Nakari. How I have lived through all those terrible scenes of battle and cruelty and murder, I know not." "A providence has watched over you, child," said Kane. "The power which doth care for weak women and helpless children, which led me to you in spite of all hindrances, and which shall yet lead us forth from this place, God willing." "My people!" she exclaimed suddenly, like one awaking from a dream. "What of them?" "All in good health and fortune, child, save that they have sorrowed for you through the long years. Nay, old Sir Hildred hath the gout, and doth so swear thereat, that I fear for his soul at times. Yet methinks that the sight of you, little Marilyn, would mend him." "Still, Captain Kane," said the girl, "I cannot understand why you came alone." "Your brothers would have come with me, child, but it was not sure that you lived, and I was loath that any other Teferal should die in a land far from good English soil. I rid the country of an evil Teferal. 'Twas but just I should restore in his place a good Teferal. If so be she still lived, and I alone. This explanation Kane himself believed. He never sought to analyze his motives, and he never wavered once his mind was made up. Though he always acted on impulse, he firmly believed that all his actions were governed by cold and logical reasonings. He was a man born out of his time, a strange blending of Puritan and Cavalier, with a touch of the ancient philosopher, and more than a touch of the pagan, though the last assertion would have shocked him unspeakably. An atavist of the days of blind chivalry he was, a knight-errant in the sombre clothes of a fanatic. A hunger in his soul drove him on, an urge to right all wrongs, protect all weaker things, avenge all crimes against right and justice. Wayward and restless as the wind, he was consistent in only one respect. He was true to his ideals of justice and right. Such was Solomon Kane. "Marilyn," he now said kindly, taking her small hands in his sword-calloused fingers, "methinks you have changed greatly in the years. You were a rosy and chubby little maid when I used to dandle you on my knee in old England. Now you seem drawn and pale of face, though you are beautiful as the nymphs of the heathen books. There are haunting ghosts in your eyes, child. Do they misuse you here?" She lay back on the couch, and the blood drained slowly from her already pallid features until she was deathly white. Kane bent over her, startled. Her voice came in a whisper. "Ask me not. There are deeds better hidden in the darkness of night and forgetfulness. There are sights which blast the eyes and leave their burning mark forever on the brain. The walls of ancient cities, wrecked not of by men, have looked upon scenes not to be spoken of, even in whispers." Her eyes closed wearily, and Kane's troubled, sombre eyes unconsciously traced the thin blue lines of her veins, prominent against the unnatural whiteness of her skin. "Here is some demoniacal thing," he muttered. "A mystery." "Aye," murmured the girl. "A mystery that was old when Egypt was young, and nameless evil more ancient than dark Babylon, that spawned in terrible black cities when the world was young and strange." Kane frowned, troubled. At the girl's strange words, he felt an eerie, crawling fear at the back of his brain, as if dim racial memories stirred in the eon-deep gulfs, conjuring up grim, chaotic visions, elusive and nightmarish. Suddenly, Marilyn sat erect, her eyes flaring wide with fright. Kane heard a door open somewhere. "Negari," whispered the girl urgently. "Swift! She must not find you here. Hide quickly and—" As Kane turned, "Keep silent, whatever may chance." She lay back on the couch, feigning slumber, as Kane crossed the room and concealed himself behind some tapestries which, hanging upon the wall, had a niche that might have once held a statue of some sort. He had scarcely done so when the single door of the room opened, and a strange barbaric figure stood framed in it. Negari, Queen of Negari, had come to her slave. The black woman was clad as she had been when he had seen her on the throne, and the coloured armlets and anklets clanked as she closed the door behind her and came into the room. She moved with the easy sinuousness of a she-leopard, and in spite of himself, the watcher was struck with admiration for her lithe beauty. Yet at the same time a shudder of repulsion shook him, for her eyes gleamed with vibrant and magnetic evil older than the world.
Lilith,
thought Kane.
She is beautiful and terrible as purgatory. She is Lilith, that foul, lovely woman of ancient legend.
Negari, halted by the couch, stood looking down upon her captive for a moment, then with an enigmatic smile bent and shook her. Marilyn opened her eyes, sat up, then slipped from her couch and knelt before her black mistress, an act which caused Kane to curse beneath his breath. The queen laughed, and seating herself upon the couch, motioned the girl to rise, and then put an arm about her waist and drew her upon her lap. Kane watched, puzzled, while Negari caressed the white girl in a lazy, amused manner. This might be affection, but to Kane it seemed more like a sated leopard teasing its victim. There was an air of mockery and studied cruelty about the whole affair.
"You are very soft and pretty, Mara,"
Negari murmured lazily.
"Much prettier than the black girls who serve me. The time approaches, little one, for your nuptial, and a fairer bride has never been born up the black stairs."
Marilyn began to tremble, and Kane thought she was going to faint. Negari's eyes gleamed strangely beneath her long-lashed, drooping lids, and her full red lips curved in a faint, tantalizing smile. Her every action seemed fraught with some sinister meaning. Kane began to sweat profusely.
"Mara,"
said the Black Queen,
"you are honored above all other girls, yet you are not content. Think how the girls of Negari will envy you, Mara, when the priests sing the nuptial song and the moon of skulls looks over the black crest of the Tower of Death. Think, little bride of the Master, how many girls have given their lives to be his bride."
And Negari laughed in her hateful, musical way, as at a rare jest, and then suddenly she stopped short. Her eyes narrowed to slits as they swept the room, and her whole body tensed. Her hand went to her girdle, and came away with a long, thin dagger. Kane sighted along the barrel of his pistol, finger against the trigger. Only a natural hesitancy against shooting a woman kept him from sending death into the black heart of Negari, for he believed that she was about to murder the girl. Then, with a lithe, cat-like motion, she thrust the girl from her knees and bounded back across the room, her eyes fixed with blazing intensity on the tapestry behind which Kane stood. Had those keen eyes discovered him? He quickly learned.
"Who is there?"
she rapped out fiercely.
"Who hides behind those hangings? I do not see you nor hear you, but I know someone is there."
Kane remained silent. Negari's wild beast instinct had betrayed him, and he was uncertain as to what course to follow. His next actions depended on the Queen.
"Mara!"
Negari's voice slashed like a whip.
"Who is behind those hangings? Answer me! Shall I give you a taste of the whip again?"
The girl seemed incapable of speech. She cowered where she had fallen, her beautiful eyes full of terror. Negari, her blazing gaze never wavering, reached behind her with her free hand and gripped a cord hanging from the wall. She jerked viciously. Kane felt the tapestries whip back on either side of him, and he stood revealed. For a moment, the strange tableau held. The gaunt white man in his blood-stained, tattered garments, the long pistol gripped in his right hand. Across the room, the Black Queen in her savage finery, one arm still lifted to the cord, the other hand holding the dagger in front of her. The white girl cowering on the floor. Then Kane spoke. "Keep silent, Negari, or you die." The queen seemed numbed and struck speechless by the sudden apparition. Kane stepped from among the tapestries and slowly approached her. "You!" She found her voice at last. "You must be he of whom the guardsmen spake. There are not two other white men in Negari. They said you fell to your death. How then—" "Silence!" Kane's voice cut in harshly on her amazed babblings. He knew that the pistol meant nothing to her, but she sensed the threat of the long blade in his left hand. "Marilyn," still unconsciously speaking in the river tribe's language, "take cords from the hangings and bind her." He was about the middle of the chamber now. Negari's face had lost much of its helpless bewilderment, and into her blazing eyes stole a crafty gleam. She deliberately let her dagger fall as in token of surrender. Then, suddenly, her hands shot high above her head and gripped another thick cord. Kane heard Marilyn scream, but before he could take another step, before he could pull the trigger or even think, the floor fell beneath his feet, and he shot down into abysmal blackness. He did not fall far, and he landed on his feet, but the force of the fall sent him to his knees, and even as he went down, sensing a presence in the darkness beside him, something crashed against his skull, and he dropped into a yet blacker abyss of unconsciousness. Chapter 4. Dreams of Empire. For Rome was given to rule the world, and gat of it little joy. But me we shall enjoy the world, the whole huge world, a toy. Chesterton. Slowly, Kane drifted back from the dim realms where the unseen assailant's bludgeon had hurled him. Something hindered the motion of his hands, and there was a metallic clanking when he sought to raise them to his aching, throbbing head. He lay in utter darkness, but he could not determine whether this was absence of light, or whether he was still blinded by the blow. He dazedly collected his scattered faculties, and realized that he was lying on a damp stone floor, shackled by wrist and ankle with heavy iron chains which were rough and rusty to the touch. How long he lay there he never knew. The silence was broken only by the drumming pulse in his own aching head, and the scamper and chattering of rats. At last, a red glow sprang up in the darkness, and grew before his eyes. Framed in the grisly radiance rose the sinister and sardonic face of Negari. Kane shook his head, striving to rid himself of the illusion, but the light grew, and his eyes accustomed themselves to it. He saw that it emanated from a torch borne in the hand of the Queen. In the illumination, he now saw that he lay in a small, dank cell whose walls, ceiling, and floor were of stone. The heavy chains which held him captive were made fast to metal rings set deep in the wall. There was but one door, which was apparently of bronze. Negari set the torch in a niche near the door, and coming forward, stood over her captive, gazing down at him in a manner rather speculating than mocking. "You are he who fought the men on the cliff." The remark was an assertion rather than a question. "They said you fell into the abyss. Did they lie? Did you bribe them to lie? Or how did you escape? Are you a magician, and did you fly to the bottom of the chasm, and then fly to my palace? Speak!" Kane remained silent. Negari cursed. Speak, or I will have your eyes torn out. I will cut your fingers off and burn your feet." She kicked him viciously, but Kane lay silent, his deep, somber eyes boring up into her face until the feral gleam faded from her eyes to be replaced by an avid interest and wonder. She seated herself on a stone bench, resting her elbows on her knees and her chin on her hands. "I never saw a white man before," she said. "Are all white men like you? Bah! That cannot be. Most men are fools, black or white. I know most black men are fools, and white men are not gods, as the river tribes say. They are only men. I, who know all the ancient mysteries, say they are only men. But white men have strange mysteries too. They tell me, the wanderers of the river tribes and Mara. They have war clubs that make a noise like thunder and kill afar off. That thing which you held in your right hand, was that one of those clubs?" Kane permitted himself a grim smile. "Negari, if you know all mysteries, how can I tell you aught that you know not already?" "How deep and cold and strange your eyes are," the Queen said, as if he had not spoken. "How strange your whole appearance is, and you have the bearing of a king. You do not fear me. I never met a man who neither loved nor feared me. You would never fear me, but you could learn to love me. Look at me, white man. Am I not beautiful?" "You are beautiful," answered Kane. Negari smiled, and then frowned. "The way you say that, it is no compliment. You hate me, do you not? As a man hates a serpent." Kane replied bluntly. Negari's eyes blazed with almost insane fury. Her hands clenched until the long nails sank into the palms. Then, as quickly as her anger had arisen, it ebbed away. "You have the heart of a king," she said calmly. "Else you would fear me. Are you a king in your land?" "I am only a landless wanderer." "You might be a king here," Negari said slowly. Kane laughed grimly. "Do you offer me my life?" "I offer you more than that." Kane's eyes narrowed as the Queen leaned toward him, vibrant with suppressed excitement. "White man, what is it that you want more than anything else in the world?" "To take the white girl you call Mara, and go." Negari sank back with an impatient exclamation. "You cannot have her. She is the promised bride of the Master. Even I could not save her, even if I wished. Forget her. I will help you forget her. Listen, white man, listen to the words of Negari, Queen of Negari. You say you are a landless man? I will make you a king. I will give you the world for a toy. No, keep silent until I have finished." She rushed on, her words tumbling over each other in her eagerness. Her eyes blazed, her whole body quivered with dynamic intensity. "I have talked to travelers, to captives and slaves, men from far countries. I know that this land of mountains and rivers and jungle is not all the world. There are far-off nations and cities, and kings and queens to be crushed and broken. Negari is fading. Her might is crumbling. But a strong man beside her queen might build it up again, might restore all her vanishing glory. Listen, white man. Sit by me on the throne of Negari. Send afar to your people for the thunderclubs to arm my warriors. My nation is still lord of Central Africa. Together we will band the conquered tribes, call back the days when the realm of ancient Negari spanned the land from sea to sea.
We will subjugate all the tribes of the river, the plain and the seashore, and instead of slaying them all, we will make one mighty army of them. And then, when all Africa is under our heel, we will sweep forth upon the world like a hungry lion to rend and tear and destroy."
Solomon's brain reeled. Perhaps it was the woman's fierce magnetic personality, the dynamic power she instilled in her fiery words, but at the moment, her wild plan seemed not at all wild and impossible. Lurid and chaotic visions flamed through the Puritan's brain. Europe, torn by civil and religious strife, divided against herself, betrayed by her rulers, tottering. Aye, Europe was in desperate straits now, and might prove an easy victim for some strong savage race of conquerors. What man can say truthfully that in his heart there lurks not a yearning for power and conquest? For a moment, the devil sorely tempted Solomon Kane. Then, before his mind's eye rose the wistful, sad face of Marilyn Teferal, and Solomon cursed. "Out on ye, daughter of Satan! Avaunt! I am a beast of the forest to lead your black devils against mine own race? Nay, no beast ever did so. Begone! If you wish my friendship, set me free and let me go with the girl." Negari leaped like a tiger-cat to her feet, her eyes flaming now with passionate fury. A dagger gleamed in her hand, and she raised it high above Kane's breast with a feline scream of hate. A moment she hovered like a shadow of death above him. Then her arm sank, and she laughed. "Freedom? She will find her freedom when the moon of skulls leers down on the black altar. As for you, you shall rot in this dungeon. You are a fool. Africa's greatest queen has offered you her love and the empire of the world, and you revile her. You love the white girl, perhaps? Until the moon of skulls she is mine, and I leave you to think about this, that she shall be punished as I have punished her before, hung up by her wrists, naked, and whipped until she swoons." Negari laughed as Kane tore savagely at his shackles. She crossed to the door, opened it, then hesitated, and turned back for another word. "This is a foul place, white man, and maybe you hate me the more for chaining you here. Maybe in Negari's beautiful throne room, with wealth and luxury spread before you, you will look upon her with more favor. Very soon I shall send for you, but first I will leave you here a while to reflect. Remember, love Negari, and the kingdom of the world is yours. Hate her. This cell is your realm." The bronze door clanged sullenly, but more hateful to the imprisoned Englishman was the venomous, silvery laugh of Negari. Time passed slowly in the darkness. After what seemed a long time, the door opened again, this time to admit a huge black who brought food and a sort of thin wine. Kane ate and drank ravenously, and afterwards slept. The strain of the last few days had worn him greatly, mentally and physically. But when he awoke, he felt fresh and strong. Again the door opened, and two great black warriors entered. In the light of the torches they bore, Kane saw that they were giants, clad in loincloths and ostrich plume headgear, and bearing long spears in their hands. "Negari wishes you to come to her, white man," was all they said as they took off his shackles. He arose, exultant in even brief freedom, his keen brain working fiercely for a way of escape. Evidently, the fame of his prowess had spread, for the two warriors showed great respect for him. They motioned him to precede them, and walked carefully behind him, the points of their spears boring into his back. Though they were 2 to 1, and he was unarmed, they were taking no chances. The gazes they directed at him were full of awe and suspicion, and Kane decided that Negari had told the truth when she had said that he was the first white man to come to Negari. Down a long, dark corridor they went, his captors guiding him with light prods of their spears, up a narrow, winding stair, down another passageway, up another stair, and then they emerged into the vast maze of gigantic pillars into which Kane had first come. As they started down this huge hall, Kane's eyes suddenly fell on a strange and fantastic picture painted on the wall ahead of him. His heart gave a sudden leap as he recognized it. It was some distance in front of him, and he edged imperceptibly toward the wall until he and his guards were walking along very close to it. Now he was almost abreast of the picture, and could even make out the mark his dagger had made upon it. The warriors following Kane were amazed to hear him gasp suddenly, like a man struck by a spear. He wavered in his stride and began clutching at the air for support. They eyed each other doubtfully and prodded him, but he cried out like a dying man and slowly crumpled to the floor, where he lay in a strange, unnatural position, one leg doubled back under him and one arm half supporting his lolling body. The blacks looked at him fearfully. To all appearances he was dying, but there was no wound upon him. They threatened him with their spears, but he paid no heed. Then they lowered their weapons uncertainly, and one of them bent over him. Then it happened. The instant the black stooped forward, Kane came up like a steel spring released. His right fist, following his motion, curved up from his hip in a whistling half-circle and crashed against the black giant's jaw. Delivered with all the power of arm and shoulder, propelled by the upthrust of the powerful legs as Kane straightened, the blow was like that of a slung shot. The Negro slumped to the floor, unconscious before his knees gave way. The other warrior plunged forward with a bellow, but even as his victim fell, Kane twisted aside, and his frantic hand found the secret spring in the painting, and pressed. All happened in the breath of a second. Quick as the warrior was, Kane was quicker, for he moved with the dynamic speed of a famished wolf. For an instant, the falling body of the senseless black hindered the other warrior's thrust, and in that instant Kane felt the hidden door give way. From the corner of his eye, he saw a long gleam of steel shooting for his heart. He twisted about and hurled himself against the door, vanishing through it even as the stabbing spear slit the skin on his shoulder. To the dazed and bewildered warrior, who stood with the weapon upraised for another thrust, it seemed as if the white man had simply vanished through a solid wall, for only a fantastic picture met his gaze, and this did not give to his efforts. Chapter 5. For 1,000 years the blind gods roar and rave and dream of all cities under the sea. Chesterton. Kane slammed the hidden door shut behind him, jammed down the spring, and for a moment leaned against it, every muscle tensed, expecting to hold it against the efforts of a horde of spearmen. But nothing of the sort materialized. He heard the black warrior fumbling outside for a time, then that sound, too, ceased. It seemed impossible that these people should have lived in this place as long as they had without discovering the secret doors and passages, but it was a conclusion which forced itself upon Kane's mind. At last, He decided that he was safe from pursuit for the time being, and turning, started toward the long, narrow corridor with its eon-old dust and its dim gray light. He felt baffled and furious, though he was free from Negari's shackles. He had no idea how long he had been in the palace. It seemed ages. It must be day now, for it was light in the outer halls, and he had seen no torches after they had left the subterranean dungeons. He wondered if Negari had carried out her threat of vengeance on the helpless girl, and swore passionately. Free for the time being, yes, but unarmed and hunted through this infernal palace like a rat. How could he aid either himself or Marilyn? But his confidence never faltered. He was in the right, and some way would present itself. Suddenly, a narrow stairway branched off the main passageway, and up this he went, the light growing stronger and stronger until he stood in the full glare of the African sunlight. The stair terminated in a sort of small landing, directly in front of which was a tiny window, heavily barred. Through this, he saw the blue sky, tinted gold with the blazing sunlight. The sight was like wine to him, and he drew in deep breaths of fresh, untainted air, breathing deep as if to rid his lungs of the aura of dust and decayed grandeur through which he had been passing. He was looking out over a weird and bizarre landscape. Far to the right and the left loomed up great black crags, and beneath them there reared castles and towers of stone, of strange architecture. It was as if giants from some other planet had thrown them up in a wild and chaotic debauch of creation. These buildings were backed solidly against the cliffs, and Kane knew that Negari's palace also must be built into the wall of the crag behind it. He seemed to be in the front of that palace, in a sort of minaret built on the outer wall. But there was only one window in it, and his view was limited. Far below him, through the winding and narrow street of that strange city, swarms of black people went to and fro, seeming like black ants to the watcher above. East, north, and south, the cliffs formed a natural bulwark. Only to the west was a built wall. The sun was sinking west. Kane turned reluctantly from the barred window and went down the stairs again. Again he paced down the narrow grey corridor, aimlessly and planlessly, for what seemed miles and miles. He descended lower and lower into passages that lay below passages. The light grew dimmer, and a dank slime appeared on the walls. Then Kane halted, a faint sound from beyond the wall arresting him. What was that? A faint rattle. The rattle of chains. Kane leaned close to the wall, and in the semi-darkness his hand encountered a rusty spring. He worked at it cautiously, and presently felt the hidden door it betokened swing inward. He gazed out, warily. He was looking into a cell, the counterpart of the one in which he had been confined. A smouldering torch was thrust into a niche on the wall, and by its lurid and flickering light he made out a form on the floor, shackled wrist and ankles, as he had been shackled. A man. At first Kane thought him to be a Negro, but a second glance made him doubt. The hair was too straight, the features too regular. Negroid, yes, but some alien blood in his veins had sharpened those features, and given the man that high, magnificent forehead, and those hard, vibrant eyes which stared at Kane so intensely. The skin was dark, but not black. The man spoke in an unfamiliar dialect, one which was strangely distinct and clear-cut in contrast to the guttural jargon of the black people with whom Kane was familiar. The Englishman spoke in English, and then in the language of the river tribes. "You who come through the ancient door," said the other in the latter dialect. "Who are you? You are no black man. At first I thought you one of the old race, but now I see you are not as they. Whence come you?" "I am Solomon Kane," said the Puritan, "a prisoner of this devil city. I come from far across the blue salt sea." The man's eyes lighted at the word. "The sea, the ancient and everlasting, the sea which I never saw, but which cradled the glory of my ancestors. Tell me, stranger, have you, like they, sailed across the breast of the great blue monster, and have your eyes looked on the golden spires of Atlantis and the crimson walls of Mu?" "Truly," answered Solomon uncertainly. "I have sailed the seas, even to Hindustan and Cathay, but of the countries you mention I know nothing." "Nay," the other sighed, I dream. Already the shadow of the great night falls across my brain, and my words wander. Stranger, there have been times when these cold walls and floor have seemed to melt into green surging deeps, and my soul was filled with the deep booming of the everlasting sea. I who have never seen the sea. Kane shuddered involuntarily. Surely this man was insane. Suddenly, the other shot out a withered, claw-like hand and gripped his arm, despite the hampering chain. "You whose skin is so strangely white. Have you seen Negari, the she-fiend who rules this crumbling city?" "I have seen her," said Kane grimly, "and now I flee like a hunted rat from her murderers." "You hate her," the other cried. "Ha! I know! You seek Mara, the white girl who is her slave?" "Aye." "Listen, white man." The shackled one spoke with strange solemnity. "I am dying. Negari's rack has done its work. I die, and with me dies the shadow of the glory that was my nation's. For I am the last of my race. In all the world there is none like me. Hark now to the voice of a dying race." And Kane, leaning there in the flickering semi-darkness of the cell, heard the strangest tale to which man has ever listened, brought out of the mist of the dim dawn ages by the lips of delirium. Clear and distinct the words fell from the dying man, and Kane alternately burned and froze as vista after gigantic vista of time and space swept up before him.